Was the ending of the original Gears of War trilogy truly worth it? That's a question that's been rattling around in my head ever since the credits of Gears of War 3 rolled and I looked ahead to its sequels. With two back-to-back mega hits, Epic Games was riding high, counting among the most successful developers of that era. But, like all great things, Gears also had to come to an end. Gears of War 1 famously changed the gaming landscape, proving that shooters could be more than over-the-top action flicks. Gears 2 took that success and dialed everything up to 11, not only delivering a deeper, more emotionally driven story, but also shattering every multiplayer record on Xbox at the time. With accolades like these, the pressure was on Gears of War 3 to deliver an ending truly worthy of its predecessors. But was it the right decision? Was it really time to end the story of Marcus Phoenix and pass the torch to others? As we all know, marketing strategies are meticulously planned over weeks and months, with specific release dates and platforms being of utmost importance. To start off this final entry of the series, things did not go as planned. This happened via the Xbox dashboard, where an ad revealed Gears of War 3 prior to the official reveal, which was to come later. Down the line, when Cliff Bleszinski, lead designer for Gears of War 3, was asked how the leak affected marketing, he simply stated that shit happens, and that the leak actually managed to get more eyes from the mainstream audience on the game, which he appreciated. The actual reveal of the game was planned for, and I cannot believe this was a thing, a talk show appearance with Jimmy Fallon. In this official reveal, Cliff Bleszinski showed off a trailer called Ashes to Ashes, which depicted a three-way battle between the remnants of the COG, the Locust, and the newly introduced enemy faction. Extremely angry, screaming rubber chickens. Here, they showcased the game's opening through a hands-on demo that Jimmy Fallon played live, and it was revealed that Drake, yes, that Drake, was going to voice Jace Stratton. This was later changed to Michael B. Jordan due to scheduling conflicts. But man, if Drake had actually gotten the part, this first scene would have aged really poorly.
Alright, give me a second. Damn, nearly got it that time.
That candy's like 10 years old, man. You're gonna puke your guts up.
Yeah, well, that's a price I'm willing to pay.
As great as the exposure from appearing on Jimmy Fallon may have been, especially in the early 2010s when mainstream media could still attract an uncountable number of viewers, those viewers may not have been the intended target audience. To that end, Chris Perna made a piece of cover art for an edition of Game Informer meant to show off key themes, story elements, and the overall tone of the final entry in the series. To make sure the issue stood out, the team set the cover in an unfamiliar and dangerous looking area. That's right, America, a Lambent-based zone meant to highlight the new enemy faction, with dead locusts at their feet to show the danger they posed. They also included a callback to Gears of War 1, by having the surrounding area be destroyed by Lambent stalks, harkening back to the destroyed beauty that was such a central theme in the game that started it all. And then he plopped down the characters. Yeah, I don't know what else to add here, that was pretty much it. On this cover, the characters wear stripped down armor to convey loss, hardship, and decay. One of the major key details is Marcus not looking at his enemies, but at the viewer, as once folded, the Lambent threat sat on the backside of the magazine, hidden until he looked closer, symbolizing how the Lambency had been lurking since the very beginning, only revealed once the Serents, and the audience, finally decided to look deeper. However, even in 2010, you couldn't expect gamers to go out and buy magazines. Look at these guys assuming gamers can read. After all, this wasn't the early 2000s where digital media could simply be ignored as with the first game. By the 2010s, online marketing was an effective and cheap way to get your product to the customer. And since the customer here was a bunch of gamers, what better way to get people interested than to create a PvP scenario that would affect the game's plot and aid a good cause? The Fate of Carmine charity event allowed people to buy one of two shirts for their Xbox Live avatars. One that stated "Save Carmine" and another that stated "Carmine must die." Buying either one would give that respective sentiment an extra point and would, by the end of development, decide the ultimate fate of Clayton Carmine, the third and final brother of the Carmine family, as no matter what the result would be, this was the end of the road for him. The same existed as an IRL promotion, in which actual versions of the shirts were available too, and buying them would yield the same result. That money, regardless of the source, would be donated to the Child's Play charity, which would use the money to buy toys for children in hospitals and help fund those very same hospitals. The goal of the charity was to show that gaming and gamers were more than just video game addicts and something that would detract from a person's life. The campaign actually ended up raising $150,000, and the verdict was that the players had to play the game to find out what would happen to Clayton Carmine. Regardless of the outcome of this event, both outcomes of his fate were actually fully animated. That's nice, right? A nice and calm campaign that does some good in the world. So, how about following it up by strategically blowing up a wall so that it creates a mural? Huh. Well, I couldn't find images of said mural, but apparently it exists. It was far easier to find proof of their E3 appearance, in which Ice-T appeared alongside Cliffy B to show off new co-op gameplay, and then perform live during a brief glimpse at the new and improved Horde mode. This live performance gave the game even more buzz, as a well-known artist was now directly involved with the project, and even made a special track for the game's OST. Not long after, people got their first proper look at the new Horde mode through the Dust to Dust trailer. The reveal itself was more grounded and almost felt like a fan edit rather than a polished, flashy trailer. It showed off the new features of Horde 2.0, like building defensive structures and managing a new in-game economy, clear signs of how much the mode had evolved since its original debut. But we will get to Horde mode later. Some other smaller campaigns included decoding hidden messages for real-life rewards and 2 custom-made Gears of War themed trikes, which were revealed at SDCC 2011, one of which was then raffled away to a lucky winner at a Best Buy giveaway. However, one of the most targeted marketing campaigns was their Brothers to the End campaign, which aimed to capture a sliver of what the final game was about and use that to gain new fans in a very specific way. This campaign was a bit hard to figure out since I only found one article about it, so bear with me if I get something wrong. See, the team wanted to poach players from other shooters of the time, but it was difficult to get fans of industry juggernauts to even consider other games. To get a foot in the door, they made use of one of the most effective ways to get things done in a friend group: peer pressure. They wanted an existing Gears fan to team up with a non-Gears fan and go to Facebook to quote-unquote detonate wall murals that unlocked extra content for the game. Much to their surprise, this worked exceptionally well, garnering over 1.7 million interactions on Facebook. Whether this resulted in tons of new fans, I couldn't really find out, but judging by the sales numbers, which we'll get to later, they sure as hell did something right. Epic didn't stop there though. They found ways to make even their beta feel like part of the hype machine. Players who bought the special edition of Bulletstorm were guaranteed early access to the Gears 3 beta in April 2011, while others could get in by pre-ordering through GameStop. The beta itself evolved over time as well, adding new multiplayer modes based on community votes on Facebook, and rewarding players with cosmetics to use in the full game. And speaking of pre-orders, there were plenty of ways to spend your money. 4 separate editions were announced. The Standard Edition, the Limited Edition, which came with a box containing a COG metal replica, an Adam Phoenix character skin, a COG flag, and other in-universe mementos from Adam Phoenix, the Epic Edition, which included a Marcus statue, a behind-the-scenes book full of interviews, photos, and concept art, plus a multiplayer skin pack, and the limited Xbox 360 edition, a Crimson Omen themed console that made Gears themed noises, along with matching controllers, the game, a headset, and 2 codes for in-game cosmetics. Pre-ordering from specific stores like Best Buy or GameStop also rewarded people with exclusive character skins like the Savage Cantus or Mechanic Baird. Across all these editions, the game managed to pull in 1.3 million pre-orders, a franchise record, and to keep that momentum going, the beta rewarded players with in-game skins and other unlockables for the full release. Epic still wasn't done though. Gears of War 3 went all in with the first ever live TV ads for a video game, a 6-part campaign that was said to be on the same level as their massive Halo marketing pushes for Reach, and 3. A series I truly and honestly believe is nowhere near as good as Gears of War. Finally, Xbox gave the series the attention it truly deserved. And while the TV ad campaign was heretofore unheard of for video games, what they did next was genuinely insane. I kept this for last because once you hear this and compare it to ads in the modern day, yeah, companies were just built different back then. So they ran this ARG that had people digging through trailers, audio files, and even Craigslist meat listings, like actual slabs of meat advertised to be locust meat, to find hidden codes pointing to specific real-world locations. If you followed the clues, you'd end up at an actual butcher shop where you could claim a pound of locust flesh and get exclusive invites to launch party play sessions. And you wanna know why they did that? Not because it was a cool way to say let's butcher these grubs. Well, okay, that was part of it too, but it was mainly because they suddenly had an extra year without any idea on what to do with that extra development time. Epic began development on Gears of War 3 right after shipping Gears 2, planning for a 2-year development cycle, as Microsoft wanted Bungie's and Epic's next games to launch one after another. With this time limit set, Epic Studios set out to make Gears 3 the most polished game in the original trilogy to make up for the various complaints of issues people experienced in Gears 2. Karen Travis, a former journalist and novelist who had already written the first novel, Asphalt Fields, was brought on to write the story this time around. The goal of her involvement was to bring more emotional realism to the universe and connect new ideas with old ones from both the games and novels. Travis didn't start by playing the games, however. Her work started with a cold read of what the community felt about the stories to better connect to those feelings in her writing. Using what she had learned from drudging through countless forum posts, she centered the story around the themes people cared most about, even going so far as to change details of the lore that didn't add up. A key point that she had to think about was that writing for a game meant thinking about how the relationship the audience had with the medium was different compared to an audience of book readers. Players could, for instance, skip cutscenes or miss dialogue entirely, which, if you ever watched a talkative YouTuber, couldn't be more true. So she kept things flexible, staying clear of heavy-handed exposition and instead letting small hints and moments slowly piece together the bigger picture by the end. The dev team also opted to rely a bit more on environmental storytelling rather than having to spell everything out via cutscenes, as seen in the very beginning of the game, where one cog tells another cog not to write on the Sudoku puzzle itself, as it would ruin it for the next person, which let us know that entertainment in these times is not only hard to come by, but also a scarce commodity that needed to be reused, or the deck of the carrier they are on being primarily used for farming, really painting a bleak picture of their current circumstances. Cliff said in an interview that the story of any given AAA game is key to its success, as a compelling narrative allows players to become emotionally invested in a diverse cast of characters. This focus on the characters' relationships was therefore essential to ensuring the game resonated emotionally with players. To that extent, the team made sure that the Locust would never be more than puppy-kicking villains, ensuring that players always recognized them as the clear embodiment of evil and didn't sympathize with their predicament. A lot of importance was placed on showing how the team had evolved into a tight-knit family since the fall of Jacinto, highlighting how everyone grew as individuals while dealing with their respective traumas. The exception was Marcus, who, just as established in Gears 2, was meant to remain the rock that players could rely on, someone who exuded an air of confidence. This consistency in his character would later be used to create a deeper emotional impact with the deaths of Dom and Adam, as well as in the ending monologue, which revealed the deeply rooted insecurities that the war had brought out in Marcus. This emotional maturity was also reflected in the addition of Anya and Sam as core members of the team, since the male characters were already too closely associated with being overly gung-ho about war in the eyes of the community. I mean, look at the main character of the game. Despite not wanting to be in the war anymore, Cole was never not ready to kill some grubs, which didn't exactly show his desire for more peaceful times. Anya and Sam, on the other hand, dealt directly with the heavier and more mature themes in the story. Anya became the emotional anchor Marcus came to rely on, while Sam's reaction to Dom's death showed how deeply the war had scarred even the strongest among them. Their inclusion also spoke to a growing part of the game's fanbase: women. As the series went on, more and more female players joined the community, and to avoid alienating them, the team made sure not to sexualize Anya or Sam. Visually, the team wanted to push things further as well. One of the biggest problems the studio had wasn't other games, but rather the nostalgia of their own community. According to Rod Ferguson, nostalgia caused people to remember Gears 1 to look better than it actually did, which even went so far as to make reviewers say that Gears 2 looked like Gears 1, and that wasn't even the worst of it. They'd heard the jokes about Gears being the Greys of war, or as I like to call it, designed to look like solidified shit and concrete. So to address that, not only did they update UE3 on a daily basis so that they would never lag behind the latest HD visuals, but they also introduced Lightmass, a new Unreal Engine 3 lighting system featuring a global illumination renderer that produced more natural colors, improved shadow casting, and a directional lighting system ensuring that every character was properly integrated into each scene and cast realistic shadows for the time. The result was a world that looked more alive than ever before, showcasing a broader range of color palettes across vastly different areas of planet Sarah, rather than the uniform concrete jungles the community had grown accustomed to. But that wasn't all. The team increased the light map resolution and had reworked every character model from the ground up, giving each one new, more distinct gear to help them stand apart visually from their previous counterparts. Chris Perna, the art director, later admitted he was slightly concerned the characters might have ended up too bulky, but overall the goal was achieved. The game looked sharper, clearer, and more vibrant, taking a few visual cues from the latest Halo release. Yet, Halo wasn't the only source of inspiration during development. Both Heavy Rain and BioShock influenced the decision to swap perspectives between characters such as the absolutely best character in the series, the Coal Train, allowing for more intricate story and richer atmosphere throughout the game. Because everything is made better with Augustus fucking Cole. These changes to the presentation of the story were made to encourage newcomers to jump into Gears of War 3 instead of the previous games, as the story was set up to act like a short story, a type of story that picks up in the middle of the plot and ends without a full resolution of every plot point. To make the game itself more appealing and to go in tandem with the theme of brothers to the end, which is so central to this game, the developers also added 4-player co-op to allow you and even more of your friends to go on this final journey together. This brought on a ton of balancing issues, as well as pacing, difficulty, and level design problems, but the team felt that for the end of the story, they should go all out. To accommodate the extra players, Epic Studios had to change up the levels, as Cliff Bleszinski bemoaned the fact that the areas in Gears 2 were too linear and thus didn't allow for a variety of approaches. So, they changed the areas in Gears 3 to allow for different strategies. Despite this, they didn't simply make the areas bigger, they instead made them even tighter but more open, so the path between your Lancer bayonet and the Locust chest cavity remains as unobstructed as possible to allow for different ways to approach. Even though this was to be the climax of the story, they didn't want to include as many set-piece moments as in Gears 2, since it took away from the game's replayability. So, instead they refocused on the basics of cover-based combat and allowing for more split routes that players can take. Up until now, you have only heard of how the team changed things for the players. So what about the enemies? Unlike the Locusts, who largely remained as they were in the previous games with some changes, the Lambent were the true stars of the show. The Lambent have been a thing since Gears of War 1, but they were more in the background. Even in Gears 2, while the Lambent were now in open warfare against Locusts, they still only amounted to recolored drones and one that resembled your mom. In Gears 3, however, they were turned into a full-on faction with their own models and, more importantly, combat styles. This new Lambent faction was specifically designed to be able to handle 4 players at once, not only being able to target multiple people at the same time, but also dynamically changing their bodies to change how they behaved. These mutations weren't static ones either. To keep the players on their toes, the developers made sure that specific enemies have multiple various mutations. These could range from turning into a stationary turret to detaching from their body to become a slithering homing bomb. In general, the Lambent were balanced to overwhelm you. The Lambent stocks would keep spawning enemies, the Palps were created to rush the players and throw off their aim, and the Lambent Gunker was meant to act as heavy artillery, negating cover and forcing the player to focus in on it, opening them up to be attacked by other enemies. This focus to overwhelm the player was also made use of in the new and improved Horde mode, known as Horde 2.0. The main difference between this version and the previous version was the fact that the mode wasn't simply testing your positioning and tactical thinking anymore. This time around, the mode also introduced a currency that could be spent on acquiring new weapons, ammo, or defenses. These defenses could also be upgraded to make them even more effective and give them more health. That's right, now you needed to not only manage your personal ammo economy and figure out a safe position to hunker down in, but you also need to repair damaged defenses or upgrade them to deal with ever-increasing numbers and variations of enemies. The team could have kept it at that already, and it would have been an amazingly fun mode in the state. However, they went the extra mile and decided to add lambent enemies in this mode, which would engage locust enemies in combat as well. At face value, one could say that this would make for cool three-way battle moments, or that it made your job at surviving a bit easier, as the enemies would partially take care of each other. But this cleverly also presented you with yet another factor to think about. Enemies would be able to kill your enemies, who were your source of Horde mode currency. So leaving too many enemies to your other enemies would actually be a negative for you, adding another layer of urgency to an already hectic mode. But what if you were your enemy? What if instead of just being a cog soldier fighting Lambent and Locust, you could be one of them and fight the others? That is where Beast mode comes in. You wouldn't be holding off a Horde this time around. No, you were the Horde. Beast mode came to be out of an experiment in which a designer decided to let players possess Locust, and unexpectedly, the Locust controls were fully functional. This major new addition drastically changed the flow of gameplay. It was a class-based mode in which you had to choose classes that could work together, Cantus being healers, Maulers being tanks, and Retros being support, while units like the Savage Drone served as your baseline choice. With these units, you would assault a cog or stranded stronghold, fortified much like the ones you would fortify in Horde mode. However, this alone wasn't enough. Early on, the mode felt too similar to the arcade-like rhythm of Horde mode, so a crucial change was made. A countdown timer was introduced. You were placed on a 60-second clock that would only increase when you got kills or destroyed fortifications. This single design choice completely shifted the pacing, from hunt everything down to go for as long as you can. The round would end if you either killed all humans or ran out of time, forcing you to restart that wave. This new layer of urgency transformed Beast mode into a score-driven challenge meant to push players not just to survive, but to compete with their friends on the leaderboards. But for those who weren't into PvE, the team also turned their attention to PvP. Over time, they felt their competitive modes had started to drift too far from what Gears was meant to be. Brutal, grounded, and intimate. To bring that identity back, they began consolidating and refining their modes. Capture the Leader became a perfect example of this consolidation process, merging elements of the old submission, or capture the flag, and VIP modes into something that felt more like Gears. PvP was also made more dynamic overall. To keep players engaged beyond the matches themselves, the developers introduced a calendar system, one that changed up the game in creative ways. From Ticker Tuesdays to Double XP Days and special campaign skins, these daily events gave players reasons to keep coming back. And with the addition of Team Deathmatch, dedicated servers, and a selection of weapons and rewards, the experience was kept fresh and mostly hiccup-free. But as rosy as this development timeline sounds, it was far from that. You see, Epic began development of Gears 3 almost immediately after Gears of War 2 was released, as mentioned before. Their plan was to release Gears 3 within 2 years, as Microsoft wanted Gears to not interfere with their marquee release, Halo Reach, which was meant to release in 2011. But as you can tell through a simple Google search, Halo Reach didn't release in 2011. That bitch released in 2010. So, what happened? Simple. As is tradition with Bungie by now, they done fucked it all up. Bungie, for reasons I did not research, moved up the release of Halo Reach by an entire year. This decision came so late into the development of Gears of War 3 that the game was essentially almost ready to be shipped out. So what is the problem? Just release both, right? Wrong. Releasing two big name games doesn't mean double the sales. It means the sales of both will go down. Which is why Microsoft told Epic Studios that Gears of War 3 would be delayed into 2011, and that decision was final. Hearing these news, Epic wasn't thrilled. Had they known, they could have built something much bigger instead of limiting their vision to make it possible to create something within 2 years. So now, with an almost finished game on their hands and way more time on the clock than they knew what to do with, Epic decided to hunker down and make sure the game would be a hit. Epic launched new multiplayer betas to test the different modes and iron out any kinks in the code, and to reach an even wider audience, if their previously mentioned Locust ARG didn't already capture the hearts of every last one of them. Because who wouldn't like to dig through rotten looking meat bought from Craigslist for hidden codes to an ARG? I couldn't think of a single person. It was in this meat-laden time frame that they also started cross-promoting Gears 3 alongside a new game called Bulletstorm, which would provide customers with beta access codes which would be used to polish the game further up until the eventual release of the game on September 20th, 2011. So that was the story of how the game came to be. So how about we take a look at the story of the game itself? Almost 2 years after the events of Gears of War 2, in which COG forces managed to flood the Jacinto Plateau to stop not just the Locust Horde, but also the emerging Lambent threat, things were going absolutely horribly. Stuck on a giant ship that the surviving COG repurposed to become a mobile farm, Marcus and Dom are called up to defend against Lambent, which are being spawned by Lambent stalks sprouting out of the water. As it turns out, flooding humanity's last stronghold may have hurt the Locust, but it barely did anything to the Lambent. At the same time as the assault started, Chairman Prescott, the lanky guy from the beginning of Gears 2, appears again after having been believed to be dead. Along with him, he brings a suspiciously new-looking King Raven and an encoded message revealing that Marcus's father had been alive all this time. More importantly, however, is the fact that Marcus's father reveals that he is working on a weapon to surpass metal to beat the Locust and Lambent threat. Being unable to save the ship from the Lambent invasion, even with the aid of these new mini-walkers that make these thick ballerinas even thicker, Baird, Clayton Carmine, Sam, and the true main character of the series, the Coal Train, saved the day by blowing up the big-ass gummy worm snacking on the ship with tickers alongside the ship. Having lost their home and being informed by Cole and Baird that the Locusts still yet exist, the team sets out to find Sergeant Hoffman, who, according to the now actually dead Prescott, holds the remaining info needed to find the location of Adam Phoenix, claiming that they're all stranded now. Heading towards Anvil Gate, the team encounters a Locust encampment in which they spot a way to get to Anvil Gate a lot faster: the fart-powered gas barges. In the attempt to hijack one, they are discovered by Queen Mira herself, who uses that information to try her best to stop him from getting to his father. Managing to get on a barge, they fly towards Anvil Gate and find Dizzy on a supply run for Hoffman. Picking him up and squashing some grubs along the way, you arrive at Anvil Gate right on time to repel a Locust attack and find out that Adam Phoenix is on an island surrounded by an artificial storm, which they would need a submarine for. Needing fuel to get the submarine going in the first place, they decide to source it from Mercy, Maria's hometown. Here they find nothing. No signs of life, no signs of combat, nothing. Except for doors that have been nailed shut, doors that were marked, bombs ready to explode if approached, and handprints. Long, elongated handprints covered in emulsion. An unnerving scene juxtaposed by the serene setting of Mercy that evokes images of the outbreak of the Black or Bubonic Plague, in which the same thing was done in infected settlements. Being shot at for disabling the bombs, a lone survivor wants the crew to fuck off so that he can stop it from spreading. Whatever it is. Unsure about what he is talking about, the team instead follows him to figure out what happened here, seeing more and more human handprints covered in emulsion, but now accompanied by huge sprays of blood. Finally catching up to the lone survivor, you realize the name no longer really applies, and Marcus, Dom, and the others head into the sewers to follow the tracks left by whatever killed the lone deader. Looking deeper, you not only find yet another survivor, but also a large amount of emulsion fumes. And as it turns out, the woman is not actually a woman, but a zooted woman. Zooted on emulsion. This marks the first documented instance of a human succumbing to lambency, and with it comes a revelation as catastrophic as it is damning. Humanity is no longer merely being hunted by the lambent. The very people struggling to survive can now be twisted, claimed, and remade by the very same parasite. The threat is no longer confined to the bodies of our enemies or the fumes of emulsion repositories. It is the beginning of a terrifying prospect. The enemy may have already won without even raising a hand. Being ambushed by hordes of lambent humans that reveal the sad truth of what happened to Mercy, the team fight their way to the central emulsion pipe and attempt to open it so they can fill up their tanker. Marcus, fumbling with the lever to open the valve, seems unable to move it, so Dom hands him his knife to help him out. Marcus then tries to give it back, but Dom just walks off. I'm sure he'll have more opportunities to get it back. This brief moment of peace, sadly, is not allowed to last, as the Lambent now attack Delta Squad full force, and to make things even worse, the Locust Horde also appears and cuts off Dom's escape route. Stuck between two overwhelming forces with no way out, Dom comes up with a plan on the spot and gets into their tanker and drives away. Marcus, not understanding, keeps fighting and screams after Dom, demanding to know what he is doing and where he is going. Dom refuses to tell him and turns the tanker around. Wrestling with his emotions, he floors it back towards the Locust and Lambent forces and demands that Marcus and the others get away. Cutting comms, Dom rams into the emulsion station and sets the entire area ablaze, saving the others while sacrificing himself. Having not only lost his brother, but also the fuel required for their journey to Azura, what remains of Delta Squad heads to Char, one of the many cities that were razed via Hammer of Dawn strikes during the beginning of the Locust War, in hopes to find fuel there. This entire section, the entirety of the Mercy chapter, is an absolutely amazing way to conclude Dom's amazing, albeit insanely depressing arc, with an ending that pulled no punches and even made it worse, in a good way, by revealing Dom's regret at not being able to retrieve Maria's or their children's bodies, and only living because Marcus still needs him to save the world. Mind you, not because he wants to save the world, because Marcus wants to. And let's not forget to mention that this is the chapter that had the honor of having Mad World be played in it, not just calling back to the one song that set the tone of Gears of War and made it stand out among other shooters, but also hammering home the loss of Dom's life. Char is now nothing but a charred husk of a city with only bandits still living there. Making a deal with these bandits, you get your fuel and head out to a location Daisy suspects to still hold a submarine. Fighting through yet another swarm of locusts, Delta Squad repairs the submarine and finally heads towards Azura, the island that they received the transmission from. Expecting the locusts to already be on Azura, they're proven right. However, what they did not expect is that the locusts are acting like Squidward in SpongeBob's place. They are here to build a new home base and not just defend the island for this operation. Delta Squad's goal is to destroy the device that is creating the artificial storm to allow Baird and Cole to invade the island. Not on their own, although I think Cole could 1v1 both the Lambent and the Locust, but alongside UIR, naval and scattered COG forces. Taking the device out, a final assault is launched not merely by the human faction, but also by the Lambent, who can now safely burrow their stalks through the island. However, still yet prevailing, Delta Squad manages to link up to Adam Phoenix and learn the truth about Ide and the Lambent threat. As it turns out, the Lambency had always been a thing, and Queen Mira contacted Adam Phoenix near the end of the Pendulum Wars to aid her people in the fight against the parasitic emulsion. Having not been able to aid the Locust in time, Adam blames himself for Ide, but vows to make up for it now, having altered the Lambent countermeasure to also target the Locust. Up on the roof of the tower the countermeasure is built upon, the team fights both Lambent and Locust, allowing Adam to ramp up the countermeasure. Having no other choice, Mira engages Delta Squad and the last of the Carmine brothers directly, but fails, allowing Adam to safely deploy the countermeasure. As a side note, Carmine showing up in a King Raven with a minigun and Leroy Jenkinsing it against Queen Mira is one of the most viscerally satisfying cutscenes ever, and the voice actor does an amazing job selling the hatred that Carmine holds for the woman that is behind the deaths of his brothers. It is just pure cinema. Pulsing waves sweep across the planet, causing Lambent to decay into pulps of now dead emulsion. The Locust, which were created through emulsion-infected humans, also begin to collapse, essentially experiencing full organ failure at the cellular level, as emulsion has been in their system since the emergence of the Locust species. Assured of victory, the team prepares to get off the tower as the Tempest, Queen Mira's weird bug Locust mount, collapses on the tower and destabilizes it. But the pulses also begin to affect Adam. He reveals that he tested the countermeasure on himself because he had no test subjects and ended up deliberately infecting himself and even accelerating the parasite's growth so he could study it faster. With significant amounts of emotion in his body, the countermeasure turns him into dust, crumbling into Marcus's hands. Adam's death once again breaks Marcus, with his voice going soft and the ever so resolute rock that he was designed to be breaking character, which makes sense in this moment. Mira, who is still yet alive, confronts Marcus and blames him for Adam's failure. Marcus, sick of her constant shit-flinging, ends her by stabbing her with Dom's knife, killing her instantly. With Mira dead and the countermeasure still pulsing, Lambent and Locust die en masse as the war has finally, truly ended. The team survived. Carmine, who was shot down in the final battle against Mira, has survived as well, and humanity celebrates the end of the long war. But Marcus, still crushed by the loss of both Dom and Adam, wonders what there is even left for them after all this. Anya reminds Marcus of Adam's last words, that Marcus should live for him, and that their sacrifice has given them a tomorrow. The story of Gears of War 3 is one of loss and uncertainty. It is made very clear that at this point, most if not all characters do not know how to live, truly live anymore. Every character here has lost everything. Not even the military structure that the COG gave the survivors remains, forcing them to look to the future and build something of their own making. This ending to the story and the original trilogy as a whole is sadly emblematic of what was to come for the Gears of War series. As with the arc's conclusion, Microsoft took some swings and nearly all of them were a miss. With Gears 3 being the climax of a trilogy that did not miss even once, it was clear that it would sell gangbusters, and it did not disappoint. In its first week, the game sold 3 million copies, making it the second most sold game in 2011, behind Madden NFL 12, which makes me so disappointed. Soon after launch, the game also reached over 3 million concurrent players at the same time, aided by the varied and bombastic campaign, as well as the new and improved multiplayer modes. In its entire lifetime, the game managed to boost the franchise sales to beyond $1 billion in revenue, making it part of an exceedingly exclusive list of franchises to be in. In fact, Gears was in such rare air that the only other game series to reach that milestone at the time was Halo, and Gears 3 specifically was lauded as a masterpiece in both gameplay and narrative with over 50 perfect scores. There was also a movie that was going to be made, but by the obvious Gears of War movie-shaped hole in the Gears lineup, you can probably ascertain the fate of that movie. It was sadly not the only project that never came to fruition. Long after the launch of the game, when asked about the future of the franchise, Cliff joked about being open to making some more creative Gears games that showed the world from other perspectives, such as a game entirely focused on the Carmine family. If the world of Gears wasn't already depressing enough, with these guys as our protagonists, man, a Carmine-based game would be the most traumatic game experience ever. It probably wouldn't have kept the general audience playing for too long either, as that was a genuine worry that the team had, as mentioned by Rod Ferguson, who went on record to say they had used some achievements for the DLC to sell more microtransactions and keep the players playing for a longer period, which stemmed partially from internal guidelines posed by Microsoft that postulated a 70% achievement completion rate on first playthrough for any of the games. Looking at the future of the series, one thing becomes very clear. Whatever the spark was that kept the original trilogy as one of the heaviest hitters in Xbox's history was no longer there, much like with many other Xbox IPs in the modern day. The first release after Gears of War 3 and its prequel DLC was Gears of War Judgment. Prior to researching this video, I had only heard that people do not speak of Gears Judgment, a game so bad that it was not worth speaking of. A game not developed by Epic Studios, but instead by People Can Fly, the same studio that ported Gears 1 to PC, or in more recent times, created 2021's Outriders. This game was a big departure for the series, as it swapped out its well-worn story structure for a more arcadey rapid-fire mission structure that would actively punish you for not engaging with the arcadey part of the game by keeping you from experiencing the Aftermath campaign, a section of the game that would take you back to the events of Gears of War 3, but this time show you what Baird and Cole were up to before the assault on Azura. It even drops the arcade aspects and instead goes back to the story structure. Besides this baffling decision, players also felt like the multiplayer was wholly incomplete, not even featuring all the modes that existed in prior games, being significantly diminished in the modes that were still present, and the game's balance not being the best either. And by the way, People Can Fly has also been announced to be assisting the Coalition, which is the studio that works on the modern Gears of War games, in the development of Gears of War E-Day. And speaking of the modern Gears of War games, Gears of War 4 was the equivalent of Star Wars The Force Awakens. It was careful to make sure that despite being a new cast, a new era, and a new studio, the longtime fans would not have to worry about Gears losing its identity. It wants to make so damn sure of it that the story itself is very, very slow, allowing the audience to get accustomed to this reimagined Sarah. This was said to be one of its strengths and one of its weaknesses, with the general consensus being that it spent too much time trying to win the players over that it forgot to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and instead ended up being just the setup for its planned sequels. Another general consensus was the multiplayer having a severely troubled matchmaking system, with reports of long queue times that could actually never end and bugs galore. It was all in all a decent follow-up, however it also didn't stand out amongst its peers at the stage, as it couldn't shake the multiplayer woes from dragging it down. I myself have not played it yet, this is what I have found from my research, but I will be playing it in the future. And speaking of being dragged down, Gears of War 5 also suffered from multiplayer issues, which were exacerbated by Gears 5 nickel and diming players for cosmetic items, or rather, multiplayer stuff in general, as the game was created as a live service game. However, not even the campaign was spared from the negative aspects of live service games, as it would also suffer from save issues and freezing. And while that may sound bad, people seem to have enjoyed the story of Gears 5 more this time around, even if some felt as if the change from one main character to another was rather jarring, and the decision to swap to an open world led to pacing problems. The only game that came after Gears 3 which was generally well received by both critics and the community seemed to have been Gears Tactics, with it being said to have a great conversion of Gears of War gameplay into a tactical turn-based format, good story, and being a well-made, mostly bug-free experience. That being said, if you look at the games that came after, it also seems as if Microsoft and the Coalition didn't quite know how to evolve the series from its roots. Every game that came after was significantly different in various ways. By itself, this decision is commendable, as it allowed Gears to experiment with new perspectives and could have led to them striking gold. However, as is the case with most Xbox/Microsoft games in the modern day that continue the legacy of an old IP, they feel directionless. They feel as if the developers are always on the cusp of a great idea, but simply lack the leadership to truly realize it. This constant and slow bleed of the reputation of the series has led to Xbox taking a step back and looking at what has been missing from the Gears series that made the series an immediate standout. This reflection eventually led them to halting the story of the sequel trilogy and instead starting work on a prequel that would take the series back to where it all began with Gears of War E-Day. As a new fan of the series, the original trilogy has been a blast to experience and was so good that I want to experience Gears 4, 5 and Tactics at the very least, despite what I have heard. It makes me happy to hear that Xbox has not given up on the series and is working on a prequel to the original trilogy, which will hopefully give us more of that semi-horror feeling that the series has been discarding more and more ever since its inception. Gears of War is, in my opinion, a far superior series than other Microsoft juggernauts. Mainly Halo. I mean mainly Halo. And I want to believe that these issues that haunted the post-trilogy games were merely growing pains, that they were learned from, and that Gears can be as massive as the original trilogy made them again. So was it time for Gears to end with Gears 3? While it could have been a perfect sending off point for a perfectly written story, I feel as if it would have been a waste to bury a world with so many more stories waiting to be told.